The massive crystal dome of the Galactic Council stretched high above like a frozen ocean wave. Hundreds of alien beings filled the chamber, their strange forms glowing under the artificial starlight that poured down from the ceiling. The air hummed with different languages, clicking sounds, and musical tones that no human throat could make. Ambassador Kim Nari stood alone in the center of it all. She was small compared to most of the aliens around her, but she kept her back straight and her chin up. Her dark hair was pulled back neatly, and her simple blue uniform looked plain next to the glittering robes and metallic armor of the other delegates. But her eyes were calm and steady, even though she could feel hundreds of alien gazes studying her like she was some kind of curious animal. The HFY delegation sat on the highest platform. They looked like giant lizards that had learned to walk on two legs. Their leader, War Prince Vextar, was nearly 3 meters tall with dark green scales that seemed to absorb light. His yellow eyes glowed as he stared down at the human ambassador. When he spoke, his voice was like rocks grinding together. "So this is what the new species looks like," he said, not bothering to hide his amusement. "Small, soft, weak. How did creatures like this even manage to build spaceships?" The energy beings called the Vorthan Collective floated nearby like living lightning trapped in glass bottles. They pulsed with different colors when they communicated, and right now they were flashing angry reds and dismissive yellows. The crystalline Zephyrians made musical sounds that somehow managed to sound sarcastic, their bodies chiming like broken bells. Ambassador Nari had been preparing for this moment for 2 years. She knew what humanity looked like to these ancient civilizations. Earth had only achieved faster-than-light travel 5 years ago. Most of these species had been traveling between stars for thousands of years. To them, humans were like children who had just learned to walk trying to join a marathon. "Honored members of the Galactic Council," Nari began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's perfect acoustics. "Humanity comes before you today not as conquerors or competitors, but as students eager to learn and contribute to the greater galactic community." More dismissive sounds echoed through the chamber. A blob-like creature that seemed to be made of purple jelly made gurgling noises that the translation system rendered as laughter. Several insect-like beings clicked their mandibles in what was clearly amusement. War Prince Vextar leaned forward on his throne. "Student indeed. We have reviewed your species' technological capabilities. Your ships are crude metal boxes held together with what can only be called primitive engineering. Your weapons fire solid projectiles like ancient siege engines. Your power systems are barely efficient enough to maintain life support." The War Prince gestured with one clawed hand, and a hologram appeared in the center of the chamber. It showed human ships next to vessels from other species. The human craft looked like gray blocks compared to the sleek, flowing designs of the alien vessels that seemed to bend light around their hulls. "Your species shows promise," continued another council member, this one looking like a walking tree with too many eyes. "Perhaps in a few hundred years, you will develop technologies worthy of notice. Until then, we grant you probationary observer status. You may watch and learn, but you have no voice in galactic affairs." Nari felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her expression neutral. She had expected this. The intelligence reports had warned her that humanity would be seen as primitive and weak. But she also knew something these aliens didn't. "We accept your decision with gratitude," she said with a small bow. "Humanity looks forward to learning from your wisdom and experience." The council members seemed pleased with her humble response. They began talking among themselves, already forgetting about the small human female standing before them. To them, this was just another routine evaluation of a backward species that might eventually become useful for manual labor or simple tasks. But far above Earth, in the hidden command center of Orbital Station Alpha, someone else was watching the proceedings with very different thoughts. Admiral Park Minho stood before a wall of screens showing the council chamber in real time. The quantum communication link allowed him to see everything happening on Zirion Prime, thousands of light-years away. His hands were clasped behind his back, and his jaw was tight with controlled anger. "Sir," said Commander Lee Jiwon, standing beside him. "The council has made their decision. Probationary status, just as we predicted." Admiral Park nodded slowly. He was a lean man with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much combat. He had fought in the resource wars 20 years ago, back when humanity was still fighting itself over the last deposits of rare earth metals. He understood war in ways these pampered aliens could never imagine. "They look at our ships and see primitive metal," he said quietly. "They see kinetic weapons and think we're still throwing rocks. They have no idea what those crude systems are really capable of." Commander Lee was younger, but she had worked with the Admiral long enough to recognize the dangerous calm in his voice. The HFY seemed particularly dismissive. Intelligence suggests they're already planning to test our defenses. Let them come, Admiral Park said. They judge our strength by their standards, not ours. They see fusion reactors and think inefficient. They don't understand that we chose those reactors because they are harder to disable and can be overloaded for other purposes. He turned away from the screens, his expression grim. Send word to all fleet commanders. Begin Phase 2 preparations. It's time to show the galaxy what humans learned from 10,000 years of warfare on a planet that tried to kill us every single day. The Alien Council continued their discussions, completely unaware that they had just made the greatest miscalculation in galactic history. The morning sun cast long shadows across New Geneva's orbital platforms when the HFY ships appeared. There was no warning, no formal declaration of war. One moment the colonists were going about their daily routines, and the next moment death fell from the stars. Captain Song Hana was drinking coffee in the control tower of Platform 7 when the first plasma bolts lit up the darkness. The green energy beams cut through the station's hull like a hot knife through butter. She watched in horror as Platform 3 simply vanished in a ball of superheated gas and twisted metal. All stations, this is Control, she shouted into her communicator. We are under attack. Repeat, we are under attack. But her words were lost in the chaos. More plasma beams lanced out from the sleek HFY warships, each one 3 times larger than anything humanity had ever built. The alien vessels moved with deadly grace, their hulls shimmering with energy shields that deflected the few defensive shots the platforms managed to fire. Platform 5 exploded next, taking 800 people with it. Then Platform 9. The evacuation alarms were screaming, but there was nowhere to run. The escape pods were too slow, too few. Captain Sung watched families torn apart as parents pushed children into the pods while staying behind themselves. The largest HFY ship, a massive dreadnought with scales that seemed to shift and move like living armor, positioned itself directly above the main colony dome. A deep voice boomed across all communication channels, speaking in accented but clear human language. Attention, humans of New Geneva. I am War Commander Thekvar of the HFY 3rd Fleet. Your resistance is amusing but pointless. Surrender now, and some of you may live to serve the Empire. Captain Song grabbed her emergency transmitter. This is New Geneva Control to any human ships in the system. We need immediate assistance. Repeat, we are under attack by alien forces. The War Commander's laughter echoed through space. No help is coming, little mammals. Your pathetic fleet is scattered across dozens of systems, and your ships are no match for true military vessels. You have 1 hour to surrender, or we will demonstrate what happens to species that forget their place. But Captain Song kept broadcasting, sending out every detail she could about the alien ships, their weapons, their tactics. She knew she was going to die, but maybe her information could help others survive what was coming. The hour passed quickly. When the HFY resumed their attack, they were methodical and brutal. Platform after platform died under their plasma fire. The final count was devastating: 12 orbital installations destroyed, 3,000 people dead, and the survivors herded into detention camps on the planet's surface. War Commander Thekvar broadcast his message to every human world in the galaxy. His scaled face filled screens across human space, yellow eyes glowing with contempt. Humans, he began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never known defeat. You have seen what happens when the HFY Empire is displeased. New Geneva was merely a demonstration of our power. You have 30 of your days to make a choice: surrender all your worlds and serve as laborers for the Empire, or watch as we burn every human settlement in the galaxy. The message continued for several minutes, listing the Empire's demands in detail. Humans would give up all their colonies, disarm completely, and provide workers for HFY mining operations and construction projects. In return, they would be allowed to live under HFY protection. Across the galaxy, the reaction was swift and predictable. The Galactic Council held an emergency session that lasted exactly 27 minutes. Most members voted to treat the situation as an internal dispute between 2 member species. After all, the humans had been warned that galactic politics could be dangerous for unprepared civilizations. The Vorthan collective actually pulsed with what seemed like amusement. The crystalline Zephyrians chimed their agreement that this was a natural consequence of human arrogance. Even the peaceful tree-like Verdani shook their branches in a gesture that meant "we told you so." Some species placed bets on how long humanity would last. The odds heavily favored complete human surrender within 10 days. A few optimistic bookmakers gave humanity 2 weeks before total collapse. But on Earth, the response was very different. President Jung Sora stood in the emergency command center deep beneath the Korean peninsula, surrounded by holographic displays showing human fleets scattered across 50 systems. The numbers looked grim, 4 to 7 human ships against more than 200 HFY vessels. The alien ships were larger, faster, and equipped with energy weapons that could cut through human armor like paper. "Madam President," said Defense Minister Park Kyung-soo, his face pale with stress. "The military advisors are unanimous. We cannot win a conventional engagement against the HFY fleet. Their technology is centuries ahead of ours." Admiral Park Min-ho stood at the central display, his weathered hands moving across the holographic controls. Fleet positions shifted and changed as he ran scenario after scenario, each one ending in human defeat. "Admiral," President Jung said quietly, "give me options. Any options." The old soldier turned away from the displays, and for the first time since taking command of the human fleet, he smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "Madam President, the HFY have made the same mistake as the Galactic Council. They judge our capabilities by their own standards. They see primitive weapons and assume primitive tactics. They see small ships and assume weakness." He activated a new display, showing technical specifications that made the defense minister's eyes widen. "For the past 5 years, while they ignored us, we've been preparing for exactly this scenario. The HFY think they're fighting a primitive species with crude technology. They have no idea they're about to face the most dangerous predators evolution ever produced." Admiral Park's smile grew wider. "Madam President, I present Project Starfall. It's time to show the galaxy what happens when you threaten a species that learned warfare on a death world." The asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter had never seen anything like this before. 4 to 7 human ships hung in the darkness among the floating rocks, looking tiny and fragile compared to what was coming for them. The largest human vessel was barely half the size of a HFY cruiser, and their hulls were simple gray metal instead of the gleaming energy-shielded armor the aliens used. Admiral Park Min-ho stood on the bridge of the flagship, a modified heavy cruiser called the Soul's Fury. Through the viewports, he could see his scattered fleet taking positions behind asteroids and debris. To any observer, it looked like a desperate attempt to use the asteroid field for cover. Even his own crew seemed nervous about facing the massive alien armada approaching them. "Sir," reported Communications Officer Lee Min-soo, "long-range sensors are picking up the HFY fleet. 150 ships, just like intelligence predicted. They'll reach our position in 6 hours." The Admiral nodded calmly. "Any word from the other human fleets?" "Negative, sir. As far as the galaxy knows, we're the only thing standing between the HFY and Earth." That was exactly what Admiral Park wanted them to think. The HFY had been monitoring human communications for months, learning their military codes and procedures. But they had no idea that humanity had been feeding them false information the entire time. Captain Oh Sung-hee checked in from her destroyer, the Busan Lightning. "Admiral, my ship is in position behind asteroid 77 Alpha. All weapons systems ready." "Good," Admiral Park replied. "Remember, no one fires until I give the word. Let them get close enough to see our faces." The waiting was the hardest part. Hours crawled by as the HFY fleet approached, their ships growing larger and more menacing with each passing minute. The alien vessels were beautiful in their own terrifying way, with hulls that seemed to flow like liquid metal and energy shields that made them glow like small suns. War Prince Vextar's flagship was a massive dreadnought twice the size of any human ship. Its hull was covered in scales that shifted color as it moved, and plasma cannons bristled from every surface like the spines of some deep-sea monster. When the HFY fleet finally reached the asteroid belt, they formed up in perfect battle formation. It was a sight that had terrified dozens of species across the galaxy, row after row of warships advancing with the confidence of a force that had never known defeat. War Prince Vextar's voice boomed across all communication channels. "Humans? You have had 30 days to consider our generous offer. I see you have chosen to resist instead of surrender. Very well. Today you will learn why the HFY Empire rules 300 star systems." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was filled with contempt. "Look at your pathetic metal shells hiding among the rocks like frightened animals. Your primitive weapons cannot even scratch our shields. Surrender now, and I will make your deaths quick." Admiral Park activated the fleet-wide communication system. His response went out on all frequencies, reaching not just the HFY fleet but every monitoring station in the galaxy. "War Prince Vextar," he said, his voice steady and calm. "You judged us by your standards, not ours. You see metal hulls and think primitive. You see kinetic weapons and think weak. Today, you learn why predators from a death world don't yield. The War Prince laughed, a harsh sound like grinding stone. Bold words from dead mammals. Fleet, advance. Show them what real military power looks like. The Kethvar ships moved forward in perfect formation, their plasma cannons charging with deadly energy. It was exactly what Admiral Park had hoped for. The aliens were following the same tactical doctrines they had used for centuries: advance in formation, overwhelm the enemy with superior firepower, accept surrender or destroy everything in sight. All ships, Admiral Park said quietly. Execute Plan Mongoose. What happened next would be talked about in military academies across the galaxy for the next 1,000 years. The first sign that something was wrong came when the Kethvar targeting system started going crazy. Commander Lee Jiwon had been waiting for this moment. From her position on the command ship, she unleashed an electronic warfare attack unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human computers, designed by a species that had invented cyber warfare centuries ago, tore through Kethvar systems like a virus through a network. Suddenly, half the alien fleet was flying blind. Their sensors showed false targets everywhere while their real enemies vanished from their screens. Worse, their own weapons systems began targeting each other as human viruses turned their computers against them. What is happening? War Prince Vextar roared as his ship's displays flickered and died. That was when Captain Oh Sung-hee struck. Her destroyer emerged from behind an asteroid moving faster than anything the Kethvar had ever seen. But she wasn't firing plasma or energy weapons. Instead, her ship launched what looked like simple metal rods. The Kethvar laughed at the primitive attack until the rods hit their shields at a significant fraction of light speed. The kinetic energy was enormous, far more than any energy weapon could deliver. The first Kethvar cruiser simply ceased to exist, torn apart by forces that turned its own mass into a bomb. More human ships appeared from their hiding places, each one firing weapons that the aliens had dismissed as obsolete. Railguns hurled projectiles with the force of small meteors. Nuclear-pumped lasers carved through hulls like invisible swords. Missiles swarmed around enemy ships, their artificial intelligence learning and adapting faster than any organic mind could follow. But the real nightmare began when Admiral Park gave the order for Glass Protocol. Instead of just targeting enemy ships, the humans began firing at the asteroids around them. Massive rocks exploded into millions of pieces, creating clouds of debris moving at incredible speeds. The Kethvar found themselves flying through a blender. Every piece of floating rock became a weapon, shredding their formations and tearing holes in their shields. Ships that had seemed invincible minutes before were now struggling just to survive the storm of debris that surrounded them. Retreat. War Prince Vextar finally screamed. All ships, retreat. But it was too late. The humans had turned the entire asteroid belt into a weapon, and there was nowhere to run. War Prince Vextar watched his fleet die around him with growing horror. In 30 minutes of fighting, the humans had destroyed more than half of his ships using tactics that made no sense. His beautiful warships, each one a masterpiece of Kethvar engineering, were being torn apart by weapons that should have been useless against modern shields. The bridge of his flagship shook as another explosion lit up the darkness outside. Through the viewports, he could see the twisted wreckage of what had once been the pride of the Kethvar Third Fleet. Debris clouds moved like deadly storms through space, turning the asteroid belt into a graveyard of metal and dreams. War Prince, his tactical officer called out, his scaled face pale with fear. We've lost contact with Squadron 7. Squadron 12 is reporting critical damage. Our formation is completely broken. Vextar's claws dug deep grooves in the armrests of his command throne. This was not how battles were supposed to go. For 300 years, the Kethvar had conquered system after system using the same proven tactics. Advance in formation, overwhelm the enemy with superior technology, accept their surrender or destroy them completely. It had never failed. But these humans fought like nothing he had ever encountered. They used the environment as a weapon, turning asteroids into bullets and space itself into a trap. Their ships moved in ways that violated every rule of honorable combat, hiding behind rocks and striking from unexpected angles like cowards. Worse, their weapons seemed to ignore the laws of physics, hitting with forces that should have been impossible to generate. Sir, his communications officer reported, Admiral Park is broadcasting on all frequencies. He's demanding our surrender. Vextar's rage finally boiled over. The idea that these primitive mammals would dare to demand surrender from the mighty Kethvar Empire was beyond insulting. It was unthinkable. All ships, he roared into the communications system. Form up for glorious charge formation. We end this now. His remaining 60 ships began to move together, forming the traditional spearhead that had broken enemy lines for centuries. It was the ultimate expression of HFY military culture. When all else failed, ram the enemy at full speed and die with honor. No alien species had ever withstood a glorious charge. The massive ships accelerated toward the human fleet, their hulls glowing with energy as they prepared to turn themselves into weapons. At ramming speed, each HFY vessel became a guided missile weighing millions of tons. For the Empire! Vextar screamed. For the glory of the HFY! Death before Dishonor! But on the bridge of the Soul's Fury, Admiral Park Min-ho watched the alien charge with calm satisfaction. He had studied HFY military history for months, learning their tactics and psychology. He had known this moment would come. All ships, he said quietly into his communicator. Execute Starbreaker Protocol. Target coordinates uploaded. Fire on my mark. Every human ship in the fleet turned toward a single point in space, directly in the path of the charging HFY formation. Their weapons began to charge, but these were not the railguns or lasers they had been using. These were something far more dangerous. Sir, warned his weapons officer, are you sure about this? The calculations show massive gravitational distortion. We could tear a hole in space itself. Admiral Park nodded grimly. Sometimes you have to break the rules to save your people. Mark. 4 to 7 antimatter torpedoes launched simultaneously from the human fleet. Each one contained enough exotic matter to power a small city, but they were not aimed at the enemy ships. Instead, they were programmed to detonate at exactly the same point in space, at exactly the same moment. The explosion that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. When antimatter meets matter, they destroy each other completely, turning mass into pure energy. But when that much antimatter detonates in a single point, the energy becomes so concentrated that it actually tears the fabric of space and time itself. For exactly 3.7 seconds, a miniature black hole existed where the torpedoes had exploded. It was impossibly small but impossibly dense, warping everything around it with gravitational forces that made planets seem like pebbles. The charging HFY ships hit the gravitational field like insects flying into a hurricane. The incredible forces stretched them into long ribbons of metal before crushing them into points smaller than atoms. But the real spectacle was what happened to space itself. Light bent around the tiny black hole, creating rainbow patterns that shifted and danced across the void. The stars visible behind the explosion seemed to twist and move as space-time rippled outward like waves on a pond. For those few seconds, the laws of physics themselves seemed to break down. The gravitational waves raced outward at the speed of light, carrying the signature of the impossible event to every corner of the galaxy. On distant worlds, scientists stared at their instruments in disbelief as they detected something that their theories said should not exist. When the black hole finally evaporated in a burst of exotic radiation, there was nothing left of the HFY charge except a few atoms scattered across millions of kilometers of space. The surviving alien ships, those that had been too far from the explosion to be caught in its effects, stopped their advance and simply stared at the empty space where their comrades had been. For long moments, no one spoke. No one moved. They were too shocked to process what they had just witnessed. Finally, War Prince Vextar's voice crackled across the communication channels, but it was no longer the proud roar of a conqueror. It was the terrified whisper of someone who had seen the impossible. They are not what they seem, he said, his voice shaking. They are not weak. By the void, what have we awakened? The remaining HFY ships turned and fled, their engines straining to carry them away from the humans as fast as possible. They left behind not just their dead, but their entire understanding of what was possible in warfare. Across the galaxy, the news spread faster than light itself. The humans, the species that everyone had dismissed as primitive and weak, had just torn a hole in reality to win a battle. The word Death Walders appeared in galactic communications for the first time, whispered with equal parts fear and respect. Captain Oh Sung-hee surveyed the empty space where the proud HFY fleet had been just minutes before. Admiral, she reported quietly, all enemy vessels destroyed or retreated. The stars themselves bore witness to our victory. Admiral Park nodded grimly as he watched the last alien ships disappear into hyperspace. Then let them remember what happens when they underestimate Earth's children. The crystal halls of the Galactic Council looked exactly the same as they had 6 months ago, but everything else had changed. Ambassador Kim Nari walked through the same corridors where alien delegates had once ignored her completely. Now, every conversation stopped when she passed. Hundreds of eyes from dozens of species followed her movement with a mixture of respect, fear, and curiosity. The council chamber itself felt different too. Where once there had been dismissive chatter and barely concealed laughter, now there was respectful silence. The same beings who had treated her like a curious animal now stood when she entered the room. War Prince Vextar was not there. The former leader of the Kethvar Third Fleet had been replaced by Ambassador Thekminut, a smaller and much more nervous member of the reptilian species. When Ambassador Nari took her seat at the council table, a real seat this time, not the observer's bench, Thekminut actually bowed his scaled head in her direction. The Galactic Council recognizes Ambassador Kim Nari of the Human Federation, announced the session leader, a crystalline being whose voice now carried genuine respect instead of polite condescension. Thank you, Nari replied, her voice calm and professional. Humanity is honored to take its place as a full member of this council. The formal words were important, but everyone in the chamber knew they were just ceremony. The real changes had already happened. The Kethvar Empire had formally surrendered just 2 weeks after the Battle of the Shattered Stars, offering massive payments in resources and technology as reparations for their attack on human colonies. Their new leadership had publicly announced that they would never again threaten human space or any species under human protection. Other aggressive species had quietly changed their expansion plans. The Mordak hegemony, which had been planning to annex several smaller systems, suddenly decided they needed to focus on internal development instead. The Zephyr Confederation cancelled their military build-up and began requesting trade agreements with human worlds. The Council has reviewed humanity's application for full membership, the session leader continued. The vote was unanimous. We grant the Human Federation full membership status with Security Council privileges and unrestricted access to galactic trade networks. It was unprecedented. New species usually had to wait centuries to gain such privileges, but the galaxy had learned that humanity was not like other new species. Ambassador Nari stood to address the Council, and the chamber fell completely silent. Humanity accepts this membership with gratitude, she began. We look forward to working with all species for peace and prosperity in the galaxy. She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried a quiet strength that made several aliens shift uncomfortably in their seats. However, let me be clear about one thing. Humanity seeks peace, but we will never again be dismissed or threatened. Those who wish friendship will find loyal allies. Those who choose aggression will face the same fate as the Kethvar. The message was received loud and clear. Several council members nodded their agreement, while others looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Everyone understood that the galaxy now had a new apex predator, and it was better to be their friend than their enemy. Admiral Park Minho had not wasted the 6 months since the battle. From his headquarters on Lunar Base, he had established the Human Defense Corps, an organization that went far beyond protecting human interests. Smaller species throughout the galaxy had begun requesting human protection from traditional bullies who had tormented them for centuries. Commander Li Jiwen now led the Diplomatic Protection Division, providing security for trade negotiations and peace talks. Her ships had already prevented 3 wars by simply being present when aggressive species tried to intimidate their weaker neighbors. Captain Oh Sung-hee commanded the Rapid Response Fleets, small groups of ships that could reach any point in human space within days. But more importantly, they could reach any allied system just as quickly. The mere possibility that human ships might appear had caused several would-be conquerors to reconsider their plans. The integration wasn't smooth for everyone. The proud Altarian Republic had become obsessed with studying human military doctrine and psychology. Their scientists spent day and night trying to understand how a species could develop such devastating innovations in such a short time. They wanted to know how beings who seemed so similar to other species could think in ways that no one else had ever imagined. Other species reacted differently. The peaceful Verdani had withdrawn from most galactic affairs, too frightened to interact with beings capable of tearing holes in space itself. They still attended council meetings, but they spoke only when directly addressed and never disagreed with human proposals. But most species adapted quickly. They learned that humans could be generous allies and terrifying enemies, and they chose to be allies. Trade with human worlds flourished as species offered their best technology and resources in exchange for human protection and friendship. President Jung Sora's administration focused on peaceful development while maintaining the strongest military in known space. New human colonies spread across the galaxy, but they were established through trade agreements and mutual cooperation, not conquest. Humanity had proven they could take what they wanted by force, which made it all the more impressive that they chose diplomacy instead. Young Park Min-soo and Lee Yuna grew up on New Harmony, a human colony in the Vega system. They played with children from a dozen different species, learning languages that had never been spoken on Earth. For them, being respected and feared throughout the galaxy was simply normal. They couldn't imagine a time when humans had been dismissed as weak and primitive. Back on the Kethvar homeworld, the former war prince Vextar now served as a cultural ambassador. He had been stripped of his military rank but allowed to live as a reminder of what happened when the Empire chose aggression over wisdom. Young Kethvar warriors often asked him about the battle, wanting to understand how their mighty fleet had been destroyed so completely. His answer was always the same: remember the lesson of the Star Shatterers. Strength isn't always visible, and the most dangerous enemies are those you underestimate. The humans looked weak because we didn't understand what true strength means. They are the children of a death world, and they think about war in ways we never imagined. The galaxy had learned to respect the small mammals from the third planet of an unremarkable star. They had proven that sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones that don't look dangerous at all.